There are people who spend their entire lives being admired for their kindness. Always available, always helpful, always the first to show up when someone needs something, and the last to ask for anything in return. Everyone speaks well of them. Everyone values them. Everyone knows they can count on them. And yet, if you looked closely at their lives, if you sat with them in a quiet moment and asked them honestly how they felt, you would find something that doesn't match the image. Exhaustion. A deep, accumulated, invisible exhaustion that no amount of rest seems to fix because it doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from being too much for everyone else and not enough for themselves. These people are not saints. They are afraid. Afraid of conflict, afraid of rejection, afraid of the disapproval that comes when you stop being convenient for other people. And that fear, dressed up in the language of generosity and kindness and selflessness, is quietly costing them everything. Their time, their energy, their peace of mind, and eventually the most important thing of all, their identity. Because when you spend years shaping yourself around other people's expectations, when you consistently suppress what you need in order to give what others want, at some point you look in the mirror and you no longer recognize who is looking back. You have become a reflection of everyone else's needs. And somewhere along the way, your own face disappeared. Right now, today, you might be further down that path than you realize. Not because you are weak, not because you're foolish, but because nobody ever told you the truth about what being good to everyone actually costs. So let me tell you, being good to everyone is not a virtue. It is the inability to tolerate discomfort, the discomfort of saying no, of disappointing someone, of being seen as less than perfectly helpful and endlessly available. And that inability, which most people spend their lives calling kindness, has consequences that are real and measurable and that accumulate over time in ways that are difficult to see until they are impossible to ignore. Think about the people in your life you respect most. Not the ones you like the most, the ones you genuinely respect. The ones whose time you consider valuable, whose opinion you actually want, whose presence means something when they give it to you. Now ask yourself something honestly. Are those people available to everyone at any time for anything? Do they say yes automatically, adjust their priorities without hesitation, give their attention to whoever asks for it most loudly? Almost certainly not. And that is precisely why you respect them. Because their attention is selective, their time is limited, their presence means something because it is not given to everyone indiscriminately. When someone who is careful with their time and energy chooses to give it to you, you feel it. It has weight. Now look at your own life from the outside. What message are you sending to the world when you're always available? When you always adjust, always accommodate, always make yourself smaller so that everyone around you can be more comfortable? You're not communicating generosity. You are communicating that your time has no value, that your needs are secondary, that your boundaries are negotiable. And people, consciously or unconsciously, read that message and act accordingly. They call you only when they need something. They come to you only when it is convenient for them. And when you finally do set a limit, they are surprised, offended. They accuse you of having changed, of having become selfish, because you trained them for years to expect your compliance. And here is the law that explains all of this, a law so consistent and so well documented in human psychology that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Human beings do not value what they receive without effort. When you give yourself without condition, when you suppress your own needs to accommodate the preferences of others, you are not generating gratitude. You are generating contempt, not the conscious kind, not the kind that people would acknowledge if you asked them, but the quiet, unconscious kind that operates below the surface of every interaction. The kind that makes people take you for granted, overlook your contributions, push a little further each time because they have learned that you will always accommodate. Not because they are bad people, but because that is how the human valuation system works. What is abundant loses value. What is easy to obtain becomes invisible. And you, in your indiscriminate generosity, have made yourself abundant, easy, invisible. There was a woman named Margaret. She was the kind of person everyone described as an angel. Always there, always helpful, always the one you could call at any hour and she would show up. For 20 years, she built her life around being needed. And for 20 years, she told herself that this was who she was, that this was her purpose, that her value was inseparable from her usefulness to the people around her. Then one year, she got sick. Nothing dramatic, nothing life-threatening, but enough to keep her from being available for a few months. And in those months, she discovered something that changed everything. Most of the people who had depended on her so completely, who had called her an angel, who had told her repeatedly how much they valued her, simply found someone else. Not because they were cruel, but because what they had valued was not her. It was her availability. And availability, unlike a person, is replaceable. Margaret spent a long time sitting with that realization. And then she made a decision that felt terrifying at first and liberating after. She decided to stop being available to everyone and start being genuinely present for the few. Not because she had stopped caring, but because she had finally understood that caring without discernment is not a virtue. It is a strategy for disappearing. Now let's talk about something that most people who consider themselves generous have never honestly examined. The difference between helping and enabling. These two things look identical from the outside, but they produce completely opposite results. Helping is giving support to someone who is making a genuine effort to improve their situation, someone who is trying, who is growing, who would be better with your assistance than without it. Enabling is doing for others what they can and should do for themselves. It is solving problems that are not yours to solve, carrying weight that belongs to someone else, rescuing people repeatedly from consequences that are the natural result of their own choices. And enabling, however well-intentioned, does two things that genuine help never does. It prevents the other person from growing, and it exhausts you in the process. Most people who live as chronic helpers are not actually helping anyone. They are maintaining people in states of comfortable dependency, and they're doing it because it gives them something they need. A sense of purpose, a clear identity, the feeling of being necessary. There is a psychological pattern that researchers who study emotional exhaustion have documented consistently. The people who experience the highest levels of burnout are not necessarily the ones who work the hardest or face the greatest responsibilities. They're the ones who cannot establish clear boundaries between their own needs and the demands of others. They're the ones living in a constant state of overcommitment, trying to be everything for everyone and ending up as nothing for anyone, including themselves. James Allen wrote that a man is literally what he thinks and what the chronic helper thinks at the level where belief actually operates, is that their value is conditional on their usefulness, that they must earn their place in every relationship by giving more than they receive, that if they stop being helpful, they will stop being loved. And that belief, however quietly it operates, shapes every interaction, every decision, every moment where the choice between their own needs and someone else's comfort presents itself. And it always chooses comfort for others at the cost of self. There was a man named Richard. He had spent 15 years in a friendship with someone who needed constant rescuing. Financial problems, relationship crises, professional setbacks. Every few months there was a new emergency, and Richard was always there, every time, without hesitation. He told himself this was loyalty. This was what real friendship looked like. This was who he was. What he had never asked himself was a different question. Has anything actually changed for this person in 15 years of my help? When he finally asked it, the answer was no. Nothing had changed. Not because the help wasn't real, but because the help had removed every reason for his friend to develop the capacity to handle his own life. Richard had not been a friend for 15 years. He had been a mechanism for avoiding growth. And the moment he understood that, the moment he saw clearly the difference between what he had been telling himself he was doing and what he had actually been doing, everything changed. Not immediately, not without difficulty, but it changed. Because once you see the difference between helping and enabling, you cannot pretend you don't see it. There's a concept in economics called opportunity cost. Every choice you make means giving up all the other options available to you in that moment. And most people, when they think about the cost of their generosity, think only about what they give. They never think about what they give up. Every afternoon you spend helping someone who could help themselves is an afternoon you're not spending on your own growth, your own rest, your own life. Every time you say yes out of obligation or fear or habit, you're saying no to something more important, even if you cannot see what that something is in the moment. Every minute you invest in a relationship that only flows in one direction is a minute you are not investing in one that would genuinely nourish you. And these individual moments, each of them seemingly small, each of them with a reasonable justification that makes them feel necessary, add up. They add up into weeks, into months, into years, into a life built largely around what other people needed from you, and only marginally around what you actually were. James Allen wrote that you are today where your thoughts have brought you, and what most people who live this way have been thinking consistently for years is that their needs matter less than other people's, that asking for what they need is selfish, that saying no is a form of cruelty, and the life that those thoughts have built reflects exactly that belief. A life that is full in the ways that are visible to others, and quietly, invisibly empty in the ways that only you can feel. So let me ask you something that I want you to answer honestly. How many times have you canceled your own plans to accommodate someone else's? How many times have you swallowed your discomfort to avoid a difficult conversation? How many times have you said it doesn't matter when it did matter, when it mattered a great deal? If you're honest, the answer is uncomfortable, because you start to see the pattern. You start to recognize that you have been operating under a belief system that was installed in you long before you had the ability to question it. A system that rewards self-sacrifice and punishes self-assertion, that confuses kindness with compliance and limits with cruelty. And once you see it, once you recognize the pattern clearly, the next question becomes not whether the pattern exists, but what you're going to do about it. Now let's talk about the part that most people find hardest: setting limits. Not because they don't understand the concept, but because every time they try, something happens that makes them retreat immediately. The other person reacts. They get upset. They pull away. They make you feel like you have done something wrong. And your instincts, trained over years of prioritizing other people's comfort over your own, scream at you to apologize, to soften, to go back to the familiar role of the person who accommodates. But here is the truth that you need to hear and hold on to in those moments. You are not responsible for the emotional reaction of others when you establish a healthy limit. Read that again. You are not responsible for the emotional reaction of others when you establish a healthy limit. If someone is upset because they can no longer take advantage of your unlimited availability, that is their problem, not yours. If someone accuses you of selfishness because you're finally prioritizing your own well-being, that person never valued you. They valued what you could do for them. And there's an enormous difference between those two things. Healthy limits do not destroy authentic relationships. They strengthen them. They create clarity, mutual respect, genuine reciprocity. They make it possible for two people to be together not out of habit or dependency or the fear of conflict, but out of genuine choice. The only relationships your limits will destroy are the ones that were built on your exploitation from the beginning. And those are not losses. They are liberations. There was a woman named Claire. She had spent years in a friendship that left her feeling drained every single time she came away from it. She gave constantly, listened endlessly, showed up reliably, and received in return very little except the next request for more. But she stayed because the idea of setting a limit, of saying this is not working for me anymore, felt like a betrayal of everything she believed about loyalty and kindness. One day, she had a conversation with someone she trusted who asked her a question she had never asked herself. If this friendship required you to disappear in order to maintain it, was it ever really a friendship? She sat with that question for a long time. And then she did something that felt terrifying in the anticipation and surprisingly clean in the execution. She said honestly and without drama what she needed from the friendship to continue. Not an ultimatum, not an accusation, just a clear statement of what she required in order to show up genuinely. The response told her everything she needed to know. The friendship didn't survive, but something else did. Claire's respect for herself. And from that foundation, from that quiet act of choosing her own well-being over the comfort of a relationship that was slowly making her smaller, everything else began to shift. James Allen wrote that circumstances do not make the man, they reveal him. And what Claire's decision revealed was not a person who had become selfish. It was a person who had finally decided that she mattered. Let me leave you with something that I want you to carry with you. The question is not whether you should be kind or intelligent, as if those two things were opposites, as if choosing yourself meant abandoning care for others. That is a false choice. The real question is whether you will have the courage to be intelligently kind, to direct your care where it genuinely counts, to protect your energy as the limited and precious resource that it is, to understand that the most powerful contribution you can make to the people around you is not to sacrifice yourself until there is nothing left. It is to invest in yourself enough that what you offer comes from abundance rather than obligation, from genuine desire rather than fear, from a full life rather than an empty one. James Allen understood this when he wrote that the outer world is always a reflection of the inner one. And the person who has protected their inner world, who has invested in their own growth, who has learned to give from strength rather than from the desperate need to be needed, that person gives something that the people around them can actually use. Not rescue, not enabling, not the temporary relief of having someone solve a problem that will simply reappear in a different form. Real support, real presence, real care that helps people grow rather than keeping them comfortable in stagnation. That is the difference between existing for others and living with them. And that difference, as small as it sounds when you say it out loud, changes everything about the quality of every relationship you have, every contribution you make, every day you get to live. You are not built to disappear into other people's needs. You were built to flourish. And from that flourishing, from that full and protected and genuinely lived life, you have something worth giving. Not from exhaustion, not from obligation, not from the fear that if you stop giving, you will stop being loved. From abundance, from choice, from a self that has been protected carefully enough to actually be present when it matters. That is what intelligently good looks like. And it starts with one decision made today to take your own needs as seriously as you have always taken everyone else's. If this video moves something in you, if something you heard today made you stop and think, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear this and subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to explore together. See you in the next one.